Greetings, mathematicians. In this video, we're going to continue solving equations. This time we're going to be solving equations with variables on both sides. An additional step this time is you're still going to start with simplifying both sides as much as you can by combining like terms and possibly distributing. Then you're going to take an additional step by using inverse operations to get all of the terms with variables on one side and all of the constant terms on the other. Then you'll work on isolating the variable by multiplying or dividing by whatever that coefficient is to accomplish that. Alright, so here's our first example. So again, you're going to start by simplifying both sides as much as you can. So on the left here, we have some distribution that we can do. We can distribute the 4. And on the right side, there's nothing we can do. Those are not like terms. We can't put them together. There's no distribution. So far we've used the distributive property. The next thing we can do is on the left-hand side, we can combine like terms. We can do the 4x plus the 2x to get the 6x. Next, we can try to get all of the variable terms on one side only. And there are two choices. Right now you have 6x's on the left and 4x's on the right. You can either choose to move all of the x's to the left or all of the x's to the right. It doesn't really matter which one you choose. I personally like to avoid having negative coefficients, so I would rather subtract 4x from both sides than subtract 6x from both sides, just kind of thinking ahead a little bit. So that's what I'll do. I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides, and that is going to leave me with 2x on the left. Now, I've done a couple of things here. I subtracted 4x from both sides. That's my subtraction property of equality. On the left-hand side, the 4x minus 4x, that's really the same thing as adding negative 4x, so that's my additive inverse. That adds up to 0, and then 16 plus 0 is just 16. That's my additive identity. On the left-hand side, the 6x minus 4x equaling 2x, that's just my combining like terms. So I'm not writing out all of these steps, but you should be able to identify any property as you go along. So maybe think about those in your head as you go, even though you don't have to write them for this problem. Next thing you would be doing, still trying to get now all of the constants to the other side. So we've got the variables on the left. That means we want the constants on the right, and we're going to do that by adding 12 to both sides. Okay, if you're adding 12 to both sides, that's your addition property of equality. On the left-hand side, when you did the negative 12 plus 12, that equals 0, so that is your additive inverse. And when you did 2x plus 0 and you got just 2x, that's your additive identity. On the right-hand side, when you did the 16 plus 12 is 28, that's your combining like terms. And now we've got one last step where we are going to divide both sides by 2. To get x equals 14. Now, dividing both sides by the same value, we can do that by the division property of equality. On the left-hand side, technically dividing by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/2. So when we're doing 2 times 1/2 and just getting 1x, that is like our multiplicative inverse. And then instead of writing 1x, just writing an x, because 1 times x is just x. That is our multiplicative identity that's allowing us to do that. And then we're also being reminded to check our answer here. So remember, you can check your answer by going back to the original problem, and everywhere that you see an x, replace that x with the solution that you found. And we want to see if we get a true statement once it is simplified. So we're going to simplify everything using our order of operations. And 28 plus 44 does equal 72. So that's how we know that we have solved this problem correctly. All right, and another example. This time we have some like terms on the left. We can do the -7 and the +2. Remember, that's really like plus -7. So -7 plus 2 is -5. And then on the right, we can distribute. So we've done two things. We combined like terms and we've used the distributive property. And then the next step is to get all of the variables on one side of the equation. Again, it doesn't matter which side, but try to think ahead. And if you can avoid having a negative coefficient, that is not a necessity, but it makes your work a little bit easier, in my opinion. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. And that's going to leave me with this. Right, a lot of things going on there. I did subtraction property of equality to subtract 3x from both sides. On the left-hand side, subtracting 3x is really like adding -3x. So that is your additive inverse. When that, we say, quote-unquote, cancels out, really adds to 0. And then 0 plus -5 being -5, that's your additive inverse. And we're basically going to repeat that entire thing again, because next we're going to subtract 5 from both sides, which is the same thing as adding -5. So subtraction property of equality, then additive inverse and additive identity is what we're doing here. And then we will divide both sides by 2. Dividing both sides by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/2. So I did division property of equality, multiplicative inverse, and multiplicative identity to be able to get down to x equals -5. And then if I want to check my answer, I go back to the original problem, and everywhere that I see an x, I'm going to plug in the -5. And then simplify to see if I get a true statement. And we do get -20 equals -20, which is a true statement. So I know that I have solved this equation correctly.